O King of Paris, tell the priests to ring the bells no longer. By God, the true one, the most mighty bell hath appeared. We have desired for thee not except that which is better for thee than what thou dost possess, and all the treasures of the earth. Set your face towards him, Bahá'u'lláh, on this day, which God hath exalted above all other days, and whereon the All-Merciful hath shed the splendor of his effulgent glory upon all who are in heaven and all who are on earth. Arise thou to serve God and help his cause. He verily will assist thee with the hosts of the seen and the unseen, and will set thee king over all that whereon the sun riseth. Bahá'u'lláh.
Thank you. So today our speaker is Dr. Sepideh Taheri, and her topic is an exploration of Baha'u'llah's messages to the kings and rulers and their implications for today. Dr. Taheri has been serving as a pediatrician and associate professor at Western University in London, Canada since 2014, where she combines clinical work with teaching and research. Previously, she was a consultant pediatrician and honorary senior clinical lecturer at the Royal Hospital for Sick Children at the University of Edinburgh. She has a special interest in the areas of health, advancement of women, and comparative religion. She's conducted many courses and lectured widely on these and other topics. So with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Taheri.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you may be. I'm going to share some slides with you, if I may. Okay, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about this really interesting subject. Of course, this subject is one that is very vast, and we could really spend a whole week, several hours, considering this story, looking at the historical context in which Baha'u'lláh revealed these messages to the kings and rulers of the 19th century. But of course, today is just a very cursory overview of the context behind these, the messages that Baha'u'lláh was conveying to these kings and rulers, the response of these rulers, and the consequences of their responses. And then how these consequences are being enacted today, and what we can do about it in our life today and in the state of the world today. So I've been asked to just give a little background in terms of what Baha'i is and why do we bother considering the Baha'i point of view on any subject indeed. And this is because the Baha'i community is the most diverse yet unified body of people on earth. This community represents a microcosm of humanity, and it represents the arrowhead of a consciousness, of an awakening in consciousness that is taking place all over the world. And the Baha'is are actively engaged in new models of community building. And this model is offered, this community is offered as a model for scientific inquiry by everyone. And it's important to have a word about the premises on which our discussion are based. The most important one is that human nature is, of course, essentially spiritual in its essence, that human beings have been endowed with these moral or spiritual, by which we mean intelligible rather than sensible powers, such as intellection, the power to create, free will, the power of transcendence, abstract thought, and immortality, but that these potentialities are latent within human beings at birth. And of course, like with every other latent power, education or training is required to realize these potentialities. And what we find in Baha'u'llah's writings is a unifying unifying vision of the nature of humanity and society. he clarifies that the purpose for which mortal men have from utter nothingness stepped into the realm of being is that they may work for the betterment of the world and live together in concord and harmony. So the vision for human nature and the purpose of life is to be able to release our potentialities for the purpose of unity, harmony, increasing levels of collaboration and cooperation as we gain a deepening consciousness of our life, and that collectively as a human society, we have been created to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization, and that this moral imperative of individual consciousness should translate itself into practical action, that there should be an integration between the inner and outer realities of life. Baha'u'llah's teachings further elucidate that the process of human evolution has been a slow and organic one that has taken hundreds of thousands of years, and that collectively we have gone through stages of our evolution analogous to that which any one of us goes through as an individual, starting with that of infancy, various stages of childhood, adolescence, and then maturity. And that each of these stages has been not only marked by an increase in our consciousness, in our intellectual and moral capacities, but that we have also translated this understanding and consciousness into an ever-evolving framework for social evolution, starting with the family unit thousands of years ago, then gradually developed tribes united to form city-states, evolved into the modern nation states, and that the next natural and inevitable stage in our evolution is that of world unity. And this is the stage toward which all of humanity, whether consciously or unconsciously, voluntarily or involuntarily, is moving. And that is a very new, hopeful, and wonderful vision that is unfolding within our societies, within our global community. And Baha'u'llah further teaches us that the process, the galvanizing force for the evolution of the human race has been this, the succession of these spiritual educators, these Buddhas, these avatars, these messengers of God, manifestations of God, spiritual luminaries, sacred fires. I don't really mind what you call them, but it's the same reality that in different religions, in different regions of the world have appeared throughout the ages to illumine and to galvanize and to energize the human ability to progress both spiritually as well as to build civilizations and evolve materially. And that this process of the divine revelation is an inescapable and inseparable dimension of existence. And what these teachers have invariably taught us has created the foundational principles of justice, of balance, of harmony, of sustainable development, of moderation in all aspects of life. And of course, these are really deep subjects for which we really don't have time to go into, but it's really important to understand the fundamental building blocks of our discussion. And what you find in Baha'u'llah's teachings is a redefinition of all these fundamental concepts in a way that is very new and very wondrous and exciting, frankly. So the concepts of God, of the purpose of meaning of life, nature and purpose of religion, the life beyond, the relationship of the world's religious systems one to another, and practical application of spiritual principles in the world have all been redefined in a way that has really been unimagined and unthought of by our ancestors, by our predecessors, and frankly, by any of even the greatest thinkers of the world. And so some of the principles that Baha'u'llah has brought are commensurate for the stage of the maturity of the human race. But because Baha'u'llah claims to be no less than the bearer of a divine revelation for the stage of the maturity of the human race, which is going for at least hundreds of thousands of years beyond. And this is really the beginning of that maturity. We're actually still in the stage of this foolish adolescence period, and ready to, or at the threshold of our collective maturity. So all of these teachings of Baha'u'lláh are designed for the stage of maturity of the human race. And it's interesting that gradually within these last sort of a century and a half, people around the world as a whole are catching up with the principles that were first enunciated by Baha'u'lláh. So just to put some context for Baha'u'llah's messages to the kings and rulers, Baha'u'lláh, as you know, was born, or as many may know, was born in the Middle East, similar to the other Judeo-Christian and Zoroastrian and many other prophets that came before in this sort of from the East. And it's interesting that although these prophets appeared in the East, yet their greatest influence, for many of them at least, not all of them, but greatest influence was actually achieved in the West. And Baha'u'lláh claims to fulfill the prophecies of all of the holy books, of every single one of them. And he was born in Tehran, but then as a result of his teachings and the revolutionary character of his teachings, which of course, as in every age, have been perceived as great threats to the established secular and ecclesiastical institutions of his time, he was persecuted bitterly and was really lived a life of exile and imprisonment and severe persecutions and sufferings. And he was in fact exiled in 1853 after nearly dying because of being imprisoned in the terrible Black Pit in Tehran. He was exiled for life out of his native country and was exiled initially to the realm of the Ottoman Empire, which was in Baghdad and all these regions. This was within the Persian Empire. And the Ottomans then progressively exiled him from Baghdad into Constantinople and then to Adrianople, which actually is within the borders of Europe. So this is fascinating because it is really the first time in recorded history that a messenger of God has resided and entered into the soil of Europe. So it's not surprising then that Baha'u'lláh chose to proclaim his message of universal peace, of many different prerequisites of the establishment of justice and peace and unity in the world from his prison and exile in Adrianople. And then from Adrianople, he was exiled to his final destination, which was to the prison city of Akka, at that time under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. As you can see, this is the sort of light brown area. As you can see, all of this area, North Africa, all this area in Europe and Turkey and Arabia was under the rule of the Ottoman Empire. So it is not surprising that he chose to establish and proclaim his message to the kings and rulers of his age from Adrianople. And then this continued also in Akka. So these messages were written between 1867 and 1873. And this is a picture of the Akka, of the prison city of Akka. And it's interesting because there are many prophecies in all of the scriptures, but particularly in the Bible, about the coming of the glory of God, which is the meaning of Baha'u'lláh. Baha'u'lláh, the word means the glory of God, coming by the way of the East, coming from mountain to mountain, which is what happened here through his exile. He went literally from mountain to mountain, from fortified cities, and from the fortress, which is the fortress of Akka, even to the river, from sea to sea, from mountain to mountain. This exactly describes the stages of the exile of the glory of God to the Holy Land. And his voice was like the voice of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory. Glory is Baha in Arabic. And so this is the fortress city, fortified city, as it said in the Bible, and also in many of the hadiths and the traditions of the Islamic scriptures and prophecies. He came to this God-forsaken city, in a sense, and to this horrible prison where the hope of the Ottoman and the Persian empires was that Baha'u'lláh would perish, that his message would be totally forgotten, and that his memory would be erased from the face of history. And it was really from this prison that Baha'u'lláh sent some of these messages to the kings of the world, which is very interesting, really from the most desolate city of the world, so bad in climate that that they said that if a bird flew over this city, it would drop dead because of the terrible state of that climate. At least even in today's world, the birds usually do not drop dead flying over many of our cities, although it's really coming to that state. So it's very interesting that from this most desolate spot, the metropolis of the owl, the worst city in the world, that Baha'u'lláh chose to, and from Adrianople, he chose to send his mighty messages to the kings and rulers of the world. So who were these guys, or who were these people, these rulers and kings that that Baha'u'lláh addressed? Well, one of them was Sultan Abdul Aziz of the Ottoman Empire, Tsar Alexander II of Russia, who, of course, was the Tsar over the great Russian Empire, the great Russian territory. Emperor Napoleon III of France, who was by many accounts one of the most powerful, the probably first or the second most powerful emperor who ruled at that time. Pope Pius IX, of course, who was the absolute leader of not just the Catholic world, but of all of the majority of these rulers who Baha'u'lláh addressed. Queen Victoria of Britain, who had the greatest share of the world's geographic basically countries, geographic area under her rule. Nasser-ad-Din Shah of Persia. And it's interesting, we don't have the time to go into this, but it is a very poignant story that there's no time at this during this session to go into the history of this, but Baha'u'lláh chose a young teenager who, it's a fascinating story how this unruly teenager was so transformed by Baha'u'llah's person and by his revelation that he begged Baha'u'lláh to deliver the message of Baha'u'lláh to the Nasser-ad-Din Shah, to the king of Persia, into his hands. And as a result of this, he was actually persecuted terribly. He suffered a terrible and cruel martyrdom. But the king received that message as a result of this. So this young man was literally sacrificed for that message of Baha'u'lláh to be delivered into the hands of Nasser-ad-Din Shah. And then in some other documents and treatises and books, Baha'u'lláh addresses the Emperor Francis Joseph of Austria, Kaiser Wilhelm of Prussia, and the presidents of the United States of America and the rulers of the republics of the United States of America, in a way that is quite unparalleled compared to the other addresses that he made to the other rulers within Europe. We don't have time to go into all of these in detail, The stories are fascinating. They are written in several different books, such as Century of Light, such as the Promised Days Come, which we'll discuss in a minute. So what about the world leaders in the 19th century? So from the point of view of religious history, with the greatest difficulty can the modern reader envision the moral and intellectual world in which these monarchs of a century ago lived. First of all, they were the most powerful leaders that the world has ever had. As I said, about 85% of the world's peoples lived under the power of these potentates. This is absolutely unheard of and unprecedented in our recorded history. So we have never had, nor have we had since, such powerful leaders as have lived during the time of Bahá'u'lláh when he addressed them. The other most important factor is that they were personally devout. All of these leaders were personally devout, taking a leading part in the spiritual life of their respective nations, often as heads of the state religions and convinced of the unerring truths of the Bible or the Quran. So this, again, is very difficult for us as some 21st century readers to mentally understand the moral and intellectual world in which these monarchs lived. The power which most of these leaders wielded, they attributed directly to the divine authority of passages in these same scriptures, mostly the Bible and the Quran, an authority about which they were vigorously articulate. They considered themselves as the anointed of God. Prophecies of the latter days and the kingdom of God were not for them myth or allegory, and the concept of the kingdom of, but certainties upon which all moral order rested, and in which they would themselves be called on by God to give an account of their stewardship. So they were waiting for the promised one of their books, the Messiah, to appear, and that they would be accountable. They were ready to respond to the coming of the Messiah and be one of the first ones to actually recognize them and to put the teachings of this Messiah into action. So the letters of Bahá'u'lláh address themselves to this mental world, and that is very crucial for us to understand. So therefore, what did Bahá'u'lláh say and convey to these messages, to these kings and rulers? Well, one of the most important messages that he gave was therefore, is that he announced the promised day of God. He announced to them that the promised one that they had been expecting had appeared in his person. He therefore exhorted them to investigate his cause with an unbiased and an open mind, to independently search the truth of his cause. He furthermore gave them several exhortations and many different advice and counsels in how they should be ruling and administering the affairs of these countries. Some of them were with respect to the actions of the kings themselves as individuals, to have oversight of what is going on in their countries, supremely to ensure that they are exercising justice in their realm, and to stop the hand of the oppressors and the unjust, to look around them and see who is it that they have appointed to administer the affairs in their land, and to really cut out the unjust hypocrites. He exhorted them to abolish extremes of poverty, to stop amassing wealth for themselves, and to distribute their wealth to the poor. It's very interesting how when he talks to, when he addresses Pope Pius IX, for example, and he says to him, "Be as thy Lord was. Do not amass all these gems and these rubies and diamonds and this material wealth for yourself. How can you," he said to him, "live with such wealth and such pageantry, and while your people are so poor?" He told Pope Pius IX, "Be as thy Lord was." And he said to distribute, to sell the embellished gems and wealth that he had, and to distribute it among the poor, and be like Jesus, because Jesus was poor and penniless. And he said the same thing to the kings and rulers, and to look after the poor. And he exhorted them to abolish slavery and the trading of men and women in every land. He praised Queen Victoria for having abolished slavery and for establishing parliamentary democracy in her country. And he counseled and encouraged all of the kings and rulers to do the same. Furthermore, Bahá'u'lláh gave several pieces of advice to create collective security at that time. So you're talking about 1870s. Bahá'u'lláh saw that the kings were increasing their armaments, constantly increasing their armaments and putting the burden thereof on their subjects. And he said, this is nothing but manifest injustice. So he gave all of these kings a recipe and a blueprint for universal disarmament and the establishment of collective security. And he says the way that this could be done was that they should establish a political unity between themselves by the establishment of a world government in which all the national borders of every country would be absolutely and definitely established through the drawing up of a binding treaty by which all of the government's representatives would abide, and that if later one of these governments, any government, arose to break one of the basically one of the terms of this binding treaty and to attack another country, then all the countries on the earth must unitedly arise and bring that government who has attacked the attacker, the oppressive government, to naught. And so he, in addition to this, he gave them the option of what he called the supreme remedy, which was the establishment of a true universal peace, which would go beyond just simply the establishment of a political unity, which they were forced into, and turn that into a true universal peace where there would be true brotherhood, oneness, and one common cause. So he gave them many different options. So this is an example of some quotes from these messages that I'm going to quote and read for you in the next couple of slides. So he said to them, "O kings of the earth, he who is the sovereign Lord of all is come. The kingdom is God's, the omnipotent protector, the self-subsisting. This is a revelation to which whatever you possess can never be compared, could ye but know it." And then he warned them about their pride. Just imagine these kings, potentates who are ruling most of the world, who have everybody literally bowing down at their feet, who are so powerful, so wealthy, that they really are so full of themselves. How easy it is for them to have become so proud and self-centered. And Bahá'u'lláh warns them. He said, "Take heed. in case lest pride deter you from recognizing the source of revelation. Lest means in case the things of this world shut you out as by a veil from him who is the creator of heaven. So he gives them this warning. He says, be very careful that your position and your influence does not act as the biggest veil for you to recognize the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings who has come. By the righteousness of God, he says, it is not our wish to lay hands on your kingdoms. Our mission is to seize and possess the hearts of men. So the mission of Baha'u'lláh is to create a unity of the hearts. It is the same message that Christ gave. Let this to Caesar be what Caesar's and to God be what is God's. He came to unify the hearts. It's the transformation of the souls of men that automatically then results in transformation of society and the transformation of civilization. He says, do not worry, I've not come to take your lands. I've come to seize and possess the hearts of men, which have always belonged to God, always will belong to God, and for which that transformation depends on the word of God reaching the human soul and interacting with the human soul, and so that human beings become better, then they dedicate themselves to the oneness of the human race by exercising the golden rule. So he basically gives them a guarantee, a promise that he's not here to lay hands on their kingdoms. Then he exhorts them to abolish justice, abolish poverty. As I said, here are some direct words from Baha'u'lláh in these passages. Know ye that the poor are the trust of God in your midst. Watch that ye betray not his trust, that ye deal not unjustly with them, and that ye walk not in the ways of the treacherous. Ye will most certainly be called upon to answer for his trust on the day when the balance of justice shall be set, the day when unto everyone shall be rendered his due, when the doings of all men, be they rich or poor, shall be weighed. So Baha'u'lláh is reminding the kings, like everyone else, we shall be made to account for our deeds, whether in this world or when in the next world, when we die and we meet our maker, as they say, in the next world. He says, examine our cause, inquire into the things that have befallen us, and decide justly between us and our enemies, and be of them that act equitably, means justly, fairly towards their neighbor. If ye stay not the hands of the oppressors, staying not, it means here to stop, to stop the hand of the oppressor, to basically stop the unjust. If ye fail to safeguard the rights of the downtrodden, what right have ye then to vaunt yourselves among men? To vaunt means to praise yourself, to basically put yourself up high amongst men. So this is very, very interesting and extremely important on how Baha'u'lláh asks the kings and rulers to bring themselves to account and to remember that it's actually God who put them there. It's their Lord, the King of Kings, that has put these kings there, and that they should not therefore abuse that position, which pretty much they invariably did, of course, as we know. And then, of course, Baha'u'lláh gives them a warning, a terrible warning of the consequences of their rejection of this message, of their inaction, and of continuing on the road that they were on, which was that of injustice, that of increasing armaments, that of creating and causing wars, that of burdening the people with undue taxes and so on, and of personally being corrupt, and to allow this corruption to spread. And Baha'u'lláh said, if ye pay no heed unto the counsels which we have revealed in this tablet, divine chastisement, chastisement means punishment, shall assail you, means shall attack you from every direction, and the sentence of his justice shall be pronounced against you. On that day ye shall have no power to resist him, and shall recognize your own impotence. These tablets, particularly the 5 that were addressed to the 5 rulers, the first ones that I showed you, are considered in the Baha'i writings, in the Baha'i, as far as Baha'i scriptures go, as one of the most challenging works of Baha'u'lláh. These tablets and summons of the Lord of Hosts. Lord of Hosts is a term from the Old Testament that referring to the Messiah who comes and establishes justice and unity in the world. These tablets were considered so important by Baha'u'lláh that he actually asked for them to be written in the form of a pentacle, as you can see here. And this pentacle is a symbol of the human temple. And Baha'u'lláh called this the tablet of the temple. And when he wrote these tablets, particularly those 5, he says, here is how he describes it once he actually finalized them and he had finished them and sent them. He says, thus have we built the temple with the hands of power and might, could ye but know it. This is the temple promised unto you in the book. Draw ye nigh unto it. In the book, it's actually referring to the holy books of the past dispensations. Draw ye nigh unto it. This is that which profiteth you, could ye but comprehend it. Be fair, O peoples of the earth. Now this is addressing us who are reading and have the privilege of being able to read these tablets firsthand and these writings. Be fair, O peoples of the earth. Which is preferable, this or a temple which is built out of clay? Set your faces towards it. Thus have you been commanded by God, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. It's interesting, Jesus, when he was referring to his crucifixion and to his resurrection, he says, you shall see this temple be crucified. This temple will be destroyed, he said. And then it will be rebuilt in 3 days. And this is the same thing. When the temple is referring to the temple of the manifestation of God, the temple of the Messiah, the temple of the messenger of God, who in every age is rebuilt. And this is when this is Baha'u'lláh, this surah of the temple, this tablet of the temple, is in fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah, who had promised the rebuilding of the temple in the end of times. That is the latter days, that means the day of fulfillment. And speak unto him, saying, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, that is Baha'u'lláh, behold the man whose name is the branch, he shall grow up out of his place, he shall build the temple of the Lord. Even he shall build the temple of the Lord, he shall bear the glory, that is Baha', and shall sit and rule upon his throne. And he shall be a priest upon his throne, and the counsel of peace shall be between them both, which is very interesting. And so this is the time when nobody else, there won't be other priests and other clergy and other people, but it will be the Lord himself. So that there will not be any disunity, that there will not be the ecclesiastical institutions who will be ruling, but this is, God himself who will manifest and will judge among the nations. And what was Baha'u'llah's message to the kings of the world? It is that he wants to see the whole human race as one soul and one body. This is the cherished desire of our Creator. And so the message that he gave to the leaders of the world is that they should regard the world as a human body, that they should develop global responsibility, global consciousness. And for the first time in our history, we have been able to view our entire history, our entire basically destiny in the 20th century as one little tiny homeland, which is one tiny planet in the planets of the world. And Bahá'u'lláh told the kings of the world to differentiate between signs and symptoms and the root cause of an illness. And of course, we know that there are many signs and symptoms, okay, but that the basic illness is invisible, it's subtle, it's one, it's primary, and that the patient will deteriorate if not found and treated correctly. So Bahá'u'lláh says that the world is one body, okay, but this body, which was created whole, has been afflicted with many different diseases, with many different signs and symptoms. And we know what these signs and symptoms are if we look around the world. We don't have to think very far. We just have to turn on the news for a couple of days or read a paper or something like that. But that he says the main issue is that of disunity. And he says that he gives us the remedy. He says, if you want the cure, right? So this is, you can either cure the symptoms, which is also good, but it's not going to treat the whole body. But if you don't want to apply the remedy, you can apply the symptom therapy. So he says the remedy or the cure of the basic illness, which is disunity, is the union of his peoples in one universal cause, one common faith, in understanding that there is only one faith of God, that there is one human race, there is one creator, and the universal cause should be that of the establishment of true peace and unity among the hearts and souls of the peoples of the earth. So he says, this is the sovereign remedy. This is the mightiest instrument for the healing of all the world, is the union of its peoples in one universal cause, one common faith, that of the oneness of humankind, the oneness of our creator, the oneness of religion, and that there is one unifying vision of the continuing of one of an ever advancing civilization. And he said that that could be achieved by putting into practice the totality of the teachings of the promised one of all ages, of the divine physician for this age. And for future ages, there'll be new divine physicians. But for this age, the totality of Baha'u'llah's teachings are the remedy. But then he knew, pretty much, of course, he knew that the kings and rulers were not going to accept his message that easily. And in those same tablets, he predicted this. And he said, now that you have refused the most great peace, which is the healing of the nations by uniting in one universal cause, one common faith, that was the most great peace, the true unity of the hearts. Now that you have refused the remedy, at least hold fast unto this, the lesser peace, the little peace. And this little peace he defined as the political unity of the unification of the peoples of the earth, and the establishment of collective security and international universal disarmament, except to the level that they require for the maintenance of order within their borders. All right, and the establishment of this world government, where they would literally just disarm, and they would definitely establish the borders of every country, and they would, create global institutions that would administer the affairs of the world. But, they would just tolerate each other because they have to, but they don't really love each other. They still dislike each other very much. But you know what? There is no other way, because otherwise there will be mutually assured destruction. So Baha'u'lláh gave them the symptom therapy, hold fast unto the lesser peace, that haply, that maybe ye may in some degree, at least a little bit, better your own condition and that of your dependents. So at least we will not resort to war anymore, for the war and conflict for the solution of our problems. but we will at least talk about it, right? I don't like you, I dislike you, you're a different race, different nation, whatever, but we can't fight. So we at least have a political unity, and we will be disarmed. So we cannot resort to these weapons of mass destruction, which is mad, literally mutually assured destruction, to destroy each other. But, you know, at least it's better than war, better than not having any political unity and carrying on and literally at the brink of extinction, putting ourselves at the brink of annihilation and another major, you know, world war. So you might think then, what was the response to Baha'u'llah's call? I think everybody pretty much knows that. So unfortunately, the vision of the Most Great Peace evoked no response from the rulers of the 19th century. Nationalistic aggrandizement and imperial expansion recruited not only kings, but parliamentarians, academics, artists, newspapers, and the major religious establishments as eager propagandists of Western triumphalism. So this is the response. The proposals for social change, however disinterested and idealistic, quickly fell captive to a swarm of new ideologies thrown up by the rising tide of dogmatic materialism. So as a result of their response, new ideologies came up. Everything was thrown into more of confusion: nationalism, racialism, communism. These materialistic ideologies emerged as the triple false gods and religions of dogmatic materialism. And in the East, mesmerized by its own claims to represent all that humanity could or would ever know of God and truth, the Islamic world sank steadily deeper into ignorance, lethargy, and a sullen hostility to a human race which failed to acknowledge this spiritual preeminence. And if we want to look at the fate of the world's leaders addressed by Baha'u'llah, I would highly recommend that you study this very challenging and very interested analysis of the 19th and 20th century response to Baha'u'llah's claim and their fate. What then might we not consider? This is a writing of a letter from the guardian of the Baha'i Faith, who was a 20th century central figure of the Baha'i Faith, who in detailed analysis describes the fate of these leaders. What then might we not consider has, in the face of so complete and ignominious a rejection, happened and is still happening in the course and particularly in the closing years of this century, where that has been fraught with such tumultuous sufferings and violent outrages for the persecuted faith of Baha'u'llah. This is what's happened to these kings and rulers. Empires fallen in dust, kingdoms subverted, dynasties extinguished, royalty besmirched, kings assassinated, poisoned, driven into exile, subjugated in their own realms, whilst the few remaining thrones are trembling with the repercussions of the fall of their fellows. Unfortunately, we don't have time to really go into this, the details of the single one of them. However, I'm just conscious of time. It was, so this is interesting. So this process gathered momentum with the Great War, that's the First World War, extinguished the Romanov, the Hohenzollern and Habsburg dynasties, and converted powerful time-honored monarchies into republics, which is very interesting. We never had republics. Apart from the United States of America, we did not have republics anywhere else in the world. Now, this one is very interesting. Uttered before Napoleon III's dramatic downfall and the self-imposed imprisonment of Pope Pius IX in the Vatican were fulfilled. Now, Napoleon III's dramatic downfall within literally 18 months of Baha'u'llah's message to him is a very interesting subject. And I will just touch on it briefly, because he was the only one that received 2 messages from Baha'u'llah. And the reason for this was this. I think I have a picture of him. Yeah. This guy, okay, who was one of the most powerful emperors in Europe, when he received Baha'u'llah's first message, he became visibly angry and he became red in the face. He took the tablet of Baha'u'llah from the hand of the messenger. He tore it he threw it behind his back. And you know what his response was? He said, if this man is God, this man is a God, I am 2 gods. Can you imagine this? So then when this response of Napoleon reached Baha'u'llah, Baha'u'llah wrote him a second message. And this message is so powerful. It's like literally the King of Kings addressing a vassal, a slave, and punishing him terribly for his response. And Baha'u'llah says, among other things, we don't have time to go into it deeply, but he says that because courtesy is the prince of virtues, and if he did not accept the message of God, if you did not accept this letter, it was discourteous of you to then tear it and throw it behind your back. He says you should have observed at least this basic manners, human manners. And he said, for what thou hast done, thy kingdom shall be thrown into confusion, and thy power shall pass from thy hands. By God, he says, it shall not endure, which is very interesting. And within 18 months, dear friends, Napoleon's army was bitterly defeated by the Prussians in the Battle of Sedan, and history has no explanation for this. And they have a term for it. It's called peripeteia, which means terrible fall from prideful heights. And this happens very, very rarely. And history has no explanation for this. And Napoleon was exiled from his land, and he died in exile, a miserable death. This is very interesting. And then after the First World War, and Pope Pius IX had to run away barefooted and bareheaded from the back of his palace, and he was exiled forever. And the whole of the papacy actually fell after that, which is very interesting. And it was just the whole Holy Roman Empire was reduced to this tiny Vatican that people go and visit now. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. It's so exciting and so interesting, and I'm just like overwhelmed by this whole history. But unfortunately, we don't have time to go into it. And then after the First World War, of course, the Romanov, the Hohenzollern, right, the German, the Russian, the Austrian, Prussian dynasties were completely, extinguished, like they were extinguished, exiled, assassinated, etc. And then it further accelerated by the demise of the Effete Qajar dynasty in Persia and the stupendous collapse of the Sultanate of the Ottoman Empire, which also had the ecclesiastical authority of Sunni under its power, and the Caliphate of Sunni Islam completely fell in 1908 by the Young Turk Revolution. And then this process is still operating under our very eyes as we behold the fate which in the course of this colossal and ravaging struggle is successively overtaking the crown heads of the European continent. And then the beloved guardian, Shoghi Effendi, says, surely no man contemplating dispassionately with an unbiased mind the manifestations of this relentless revolutionizing process within comparatively so short a time can escape the conclusion that the last 100 years may be regarded, insofar as the fortunes of royalty are concerned, as one of the most cataclysmic periods in the annals of mankind. And I think I have to stop here because we are going to, let me see, we are now at 1 o'clock. So I want to sort of talk about this in more detailed, and I just want to perhaps finish with this slide, that the well-being of mankind, its peace and security, are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. To this day, however, you will find that most people take the opposite point of view, that they look upon unity as an ultimate, almost unattainable goal, and concentrate first on remedying all the other ills of mankind. And that, did they but know it, all the other ills of our various symptoms and side effects of this basic disease, which is disunity. And again, I would relate you back to the fact that because of the rejection of the kings of the world, us ordinary human beings have been given the privilege and the incredible bounty of establishing this unity and this oneness gradually ourselves, because the kings didn't do it when they had the power. Now we are the privileged ones to be able to gradually build this oneness and this unity throughout the world. Thank you, dear friends, for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was a really comprehensive presentation on this really interesting topic. Now we have time for questions, so people can put their questions in the chat. The first question is, please share the greater plan of God.
Okay, so this is what really I didn't have that much time to go into. But basically, as a result of the rejection of the these, maybe I'll share it again then a little bit. So I don't want to speak too much. This topic is a very interesting one. And of course, I'll share just a few slides. So basically, as a result of the rejection of the rulers and kings of the world, of this healing message of Bahá'u'lláh, God basically decided that, this is a very sort of crude way of putting it, but two processes were released into the world. Because the plan of God for humanity is, as we said, achievement of unity, of the establishment of, in Christian terminology, the kingdom of God on earth, or the achievement of unification of the whole world. But because the kings and rulers rejected this, this process, this major plan of God was released into the world, this great process, which we call the major plan of God in Baha'i sort of terminology. And this process is tumultuous in its progress. It's working through humanity as a whole. And of course, humanity is not conscious of the source of these massive cataclysmic events that have been happening. And the purpose of this is to tear down barriers to world unity of this major plan of God. And that we are going to have to go through these fires of suffering and experience to get into it. And what it's doing to us is that it's forging all these disunited elements within the nations and peoples in the world, forging us into a unified body, in one which is in one piece, but unfortunately it is lifeless. And ultimately, this major plan of God is leading to the establishment of this political unification of this world, which is collective security, ceasefire, stopping wars as a means of solving conflicts forever. And this state is described as the lesser peace and this political unification. However, there is then and then this agency of the major plan of God is the people of the world, who are ignorant of its course and sometimes even antagonistic towards the same. And it uses everybody, both the mighty and lofty, and the lowly, as the pawns in this world-shaping game for the fulfillment of his immediate purpose, which is political unity, and the eventual establishment of the kingdom of God on earth, which is the most great peace. This is the next stage, which takes many centuries to establish. And then the minor plan of God, as opposed to the major plan of God, which is creating true unity and spirituality and breathing life into this dead unified body, is the task of those who are conscious of the source of these upheavals and conscious of the direction of human evolution, who are up to those who are Baha'is and their collaborators, who are working consciously with detailed instructions, with continuing guidance, divine guidance, to erect the fabric of the kingdom of God on earth as promised by Christ and by many others in different words in the other religious traditions of humanity. And so we have these twin processes, these two plans, these two revolutions, which are world-shaking, world-embracing, and go through this dialectic of crisis and victory. And I might as well just show this slide, which is this major plan of God has this paradoxical quality. So it arouses hopes. For example, we have the rise of democracies, the emancipation of women taking place everywhere, abolition of slavery, the establishment of League of Nations, United Nations, the technological and scientific advancements that have literally contracted the world into one universal neighborhood, the peace movements, the movements for equity, diversity, and so on. And then at the same time, it creates fears. So all the First World War, the Second World War, weapons of mass destruction, neo-colonialism, forms that have been emerging, international terrorism, bioterrorism, this, that, the epidemics ravaging populations, breakdown of the moral fabric, climate disaster, etc. So there is this paradoxical quality of, integration and disintegration at the same time.
Thank you. And there's a question about what you mean by lifeless.
It means that it basically has no spirit, right? So if you just have political unity, if you think about if you think about, say, different antagonistic countries uniting, right? But do I really love you? No, I don't love you. I just have to unite with you because of mutually assured destruction, because I am forced into speaking with you. I am forced into uniting with you. So that's the state of the world at the time of this political unification. It's basically unified, but it has no real life, because this is a political unity that the nations are forced into, not because they love each other and they, not even respecting, but it's because they are forced into it. So what kind of a unity is that? Is that a real living unity? If it's just on the political level, it's not. So that is why it's the metaphor is described as a stage in which the body is unified, but it's actually lifeless. True life is when it's breathed into that lifeless body, is when there is true unity. There's true spirituality. There is true love between the hearts of humanity. And this comes from an inner consciousness, from a moral consciousness, which is an inner state of not just the belief, but the conviction, certitude in the concept of the oneness and wholeness of the human race, and willing to actually establish this by positive action rather than being forced into it. It should be a voluntary act on the part of the peoples of the world.
Thank you. The next question is, what was the response of Pope Pius to the letter of Bahá'u'lláh?
Zero, nothing at all. Pretty much everybody's response was silence. I mean, Napoleon tore the tablet and threw it in his back and reacted negatively. you know, Nasruddin Shah, he killed, you know, they killed the teenager who received it, and of course the response was negative and rising in opposition and increasing the opposition and the persecution. The same with the Sultan and so on. The only one who is said to have at all responded in any sort of semi-positive manner was Queen Victoria, who is reported to have said, if this message is from God, it will spread, and if not, it will do us no harm. So interestingly, hers is the only dynasty of all of these that I've shown you that has actually survived. Another interesting fact about Pope Pius IX is that it really was he who introduced for the first time, who invented the principle of papal infallibility, which I find very interesting. The doctrine of papal infallibility was not a thing within the Holy Roman Empire, within Catholicism. Pope Pius IX invented it. Personally, I think that is an act of tremendous pride. And it's interesting that he was the one that Bahá'u'lláh addressed, and he is the one that was exiled and had to flee from his own palace, and actually that was the beginning of the downfall of the Holy Roman Empire. It's interesting. There are many other very interesting nuances and little details to a lot of these things that I would encourage you to study.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. Baha'u'lláh certainly knew the reaction of the kings and ecclesiastics of his time. Do you think his reason for revealing these ominous tablets is for future generations to learn from the mistakes of people in power?
That's actually a very interesting concept. Yes, I think that certainly could be. It has tremendous implications for us, for the leaders today. And I just wanted to say that, you know, we shouldn't think that the message of Baha'u'lláh, his proclamation to the kings and leaders with all this advice, was just a one-time thing. Abdu'l-Baha, so his son, which is described as the branch, actually, as you saw in the in Zechariah's prophecy, the Abdu'l-Baha actually traveled throughout the West and in Egypt, in the East, and of course he was in the East, but Abdu'l-Baha traveled throughout the West, and he proclaimed in similar words, but in somewhat different, more sort of up-to-date words, the message of Baha'u'lláh for the establishment of world government, world peace, in collective security, etc., and all the other teachings that have to go along with that, both in terms of political unification and in terms of real unification. And he met with many of the academics, the great teachers, the leaders of the West at that time, in the early 20th century, just before the First World War, actually. And in addition to that, he wrote a treatise on civilization and how civilizations can come into being, preserved, progress, and what leads to their downfall. And he anonymously published this, and this was spread in the East, particularly in Persia. And then after that, and met all of these treatises, these talks, these sort of writings were widely publicized, particularly to the leaders and to the thinkers of the world, as well as to the masses of the people who could read and write at that time. And then following that, the guardian of the Baha'i faith did the same thing. He actually sent these messages and similar ones to the leaders of the sort of middle of the 20th century. And then after that, the Universal House of Justice, which is the first democratically elected universal sort of universal institution in the world, and the governing supreme institution of the Baha'i world, did the same thing. In the 1960s, they sent and delivered the same messages of Baha'u'lláh to the leaders of the world and rulers of the world. And they have continued to do that, whether it's in the United Nations, whether it's to the leaders of the world. Then came many other statements, such as the Promise of World Peace, that were millions of copies of the Promise of World Peace, which is literally the message of Baha'u'lláh to the kings and rulers, expanded on, but this time addressed to the peoples of the world, including their rulers. And many hundreds of thousands of leaders and rulers in the world received these in person, was spread again. And then since then, again, many other messages to the religious leaders of the world have been disseminated and given out by the House of Justice. One Common Faith statement on Baha'u'lláh, and where this is all repeated, and in numerous other statements through the Baha'i international communities, offices in the United Nations, around the world. This message of Baha'u'lláh has been repeated repeatedly in world fora. So, for example, in the Millennium Summit in 2001, when the world's leaders for the first time gathered in this large group at the Millennium Summit, the co-chair of that institution was actually Sepideh Taheri, who is a representative of the Baha'i international community. He's from Ethiopian backgrounds. He addressed all the presidents and rulers and kings of the world of the necessity for establishing this universal peace, basically this at least the political unification and this consciousness of the oneness of mankind. So it's very interesting that this message, we have not sort of just sat still and just that was a message that Baha'u'lláh sent to those rulers. We are learning about their implications literally on a daily basis. And of course, in the future, an interesting proposition is that we will not, in fact, have the same concept of kingship and rule and leadership that have historically existed. Baha'u'lláh, in fact, says that one of the signs of the appearance of maturity in the world is that kingship will remain, leadership, positions of leadership will remain, but no one will be found willing to bear alone its weight. It's amazing. So whereas nowadays everybody is still vying for leadership, kingship, right? In the future, Baha'u'lláh says positions of leadership and kingship will remain, but nobody will want to actually bear alone their weight to take that responsibility, and only for the sake of God and service to humanity will anyone, take on this massive responsibility. And even then, they don't want to do it alone. And the concepts of leadership will be that of servitude to the human race, not amassing wealth, not vying for leadership, not going for propaganda and all this advertisements and this electioneering and the campaigning and so on that we see today, where they say, vote for me, I'm the best, and I will do this and this. All of this will be superseded by a totally new state of mind and a concept of leadership based on servitude. And those who do not want to be elected as leaders will be elected. So it's and decision-making will not be invested in individuals, but it will be invested in democratically elected bodies into decision-making groups who will follow a completely different paradigm of decision-making, and it will be spiritually founded and spiritually inspired by a moral state, a wholly different moral condition than what we experience today. But yes, it's a lesson for all of us. It's a lesson for certainly today, tomorrow, for centuries to come. But we have to reiterate these and, on a daily basis. And we're getting closer to actually the establishment of putting into practice some of these exhortations.
Thank you. What was Baha'u'llah's message to the president of the US that's different than what he advised to the monarchs of Europe and the Middle East?
That's a very good question, and it's an interesting one. But Baha'u'lláh basically gives the leaders of the United States a mandate that is unparalleled. to any of the others. Bahá'u'lláh gives them the mandate to establish peace around the world and to stay the hands of the oppressors. So Bahá'u'lláh foresees the United States of America as a nation playing a flag holder role, a major role, a leadership role in the establishment of justice and true democracy throughout the world, and ensuring that any oppressors are actually basically oppressors are, the hands of the oppressors are basically stayed, you know, to prevent oppression around the world and to establish the principles of liberal democracy in a more advanced form throughout the world, and to help establishment of this, which I think, I won't go into some political statements, but I think the destiny of the United States of America as a government is a very great one, because it has to be the flag bearer of the establishment of universal peace and the principles of liberal democracy that underlie its own its own constitution, to that of the relationships that exist among the peoples of the world. And Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, has said that the establishment of a world federation of nations will follow a similar route which the United States of America took before it was established as the great republic of the New World. And that because of this, the United States has the experience, it has the know-how, it has the power, and it has the destiny to establish peace in the world and to be a leader in this area. But if you want to look at the destiny of America and so on, that's a discussion for at least 4 hours, actually. Because if you want to go into the historical context and the nitty-gritty of it, it's a fascinating subject.
So thank you so much again for this talk, and we really appreciated it.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening, for being with us.
Thank you. So our speaker next week will be Dr. Kendall Williams, and his topic will be why the Baha'i Faith is a really big deal. So if you'd like to be on our mailing list, I'll put the link to that in our in the chat. Thank you, everyone. See you next week. Bye.